Okay.
Call this meeting to order. Please rise for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is a workshop of the Board of Education for the purposes of the upcoming budget. I will turn this over for budget overview to Superintendent Lisa Wiles.
So good evening. We're beginning our process to develop the 2021-22 school budget, proposed budget, which will be voted on May 18th, third Tuesday of May. And we have a calendar. Tonight, we're going to be doing some preliminary budget forecasts and assumptions, going over tax estimates, tax levy caps, and various portions of the budget, the administrative, buildings and grounds, transportation and technology, AV and educational TV. We'll be talking about the governor's run of his state aid. And I'm going to kick the first couple of budget slides over to Mr. Napoli, and I'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Napoli.
Thank you. So I'm not being rude, but the camera's over here, so I can talk to the audience. I'll try to go back and forth. Being presented to the audience is a slide right now about the topics we're going to be talking about tonight. The superintendent will do a full budget overview, including some state information. We're going to be comparing the 2021 to the 2022 budget, 21-22 budget. We'll be talking about some proposed staff additions. We'll be going over some anticipated expenses, where we're going to be getting our funding from. We'll be doing a quick state aid analysis. I'll talk about some state, our tax levy limits, and then we'll dive into those 5 departmental budgets. So now I'm going to go back to the superintendent. She's going to talk about where we are now, why we're here, and talk about some of our revenues, why they're declining, and talk about some of the expenses that we've had and some of the expenses that we anticipate in the upcoming school year.
Okay, so there's 2 parts of the budget, the revenue side of the budget and the expense side of the budget, and those have to be balanced very often with the use of reserves for any type of deficit. So when we talk about revenues, there's really 2 sources of revenue. You have state aid and federal aid, and then you have the tax levy. And over the last many years, we have a property tax cap, which has severely limited our ability, good and bad. It has allowed us to keep the tax levy down, but it severely limited our ability to grow programs here, especially because the state aid allocations have been anemic. So much so that we keep talking about the foundation aid and how $3.5 million of back foundation aid is owed to us. And the foundation aid that formula has never been allowed to run. So we're not really seeing what the fruits of what that formula can provide to a high needs district like ours. So just a little history for a couple of seconds actually. That foundation aid formula was put in place as a result of a lawsuit brought on by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity on behalf of high needs districts who were underfunded. And still, and yes, there has been economic plights and we have had all of that, but it's still not funded and we have been shortchanged quite a bit. So we have the property tax cap, federal support. When we talk about federal support, we're talking about our Title I funds, our IDEA monies that are not fully funded. And those revenues, which you'll see, have continued to decline over the years. Vince will do a comparison of state aid. So every year in January, the governor puts his proposal up for what the next year's state aid is going to be. This year had some surprises in it. And I'll talk a little bit about our legislators, senators, and assemblymen I was at a meeting with that was hosted by the Ulster County School Boards Association, and they're going to be actively working on making sure schools are properly funded. We have the erosion of our tax base. This all falls under declining revenues. We know over the last 15 or 20 years, we've lost really the base of our economic engines with the loss of many jobs in the community. Going on to reserves, I did put information on your packet. There's been some banter out there that we have a large number of reserves, which we did about 10 years ago when we had the comptroller's report. We had about $12 million plus of reserves, and we've been using those reserves to cover operational deficits. So we're down to approximately $7 million in reserves, and our intention is to continue to use that when necessary to cover any deficits. The problems with using reserves is that eventually when you don't have any more, it's like a savings account. You're just left with your revenues and your expenses. And if you're not getting more revenue, you have to decrease your expenses. That reserves and fund balance, all the same thing. Pandemic state aid adjustments. So last year when we got a pandemic state aid allocation from the federal government, it was for about, I think, $670,000. When we got that money, that was supposed to help us through a very difficult economic time. Well, we got that money from the feds, and that money was deducted from our general fund allocation. So it wasn't an additional amount that we got. So when that happens, we call that supplanting, not supplementing. So supplemental is you get extra. Supplant means we give and we take away. And we're supplanting the money that you have already. We're hoping that the next federal stimulus bill to prompt the economy will have less supplanting and more supplementing. But we won't know until everything shakes out, hopefully by April 1st. The governor's proposal, a couple of the things that I'll talk about here, and Vince will go over them in more detail. So when he put his proposal out, he collapsed probably 6 or 7 state aid codes like BOCES aid, textbook aid, software aid, and he took all of those and he combined them into one general operating aid, as opposed to having it transparent where you could see exactly what you were getting for each one of those lines. They're all lumped together, and there's some very complicated formulas on how you get that. The claim is that you have more flexibility to do what you want with that. The problem with that is that we can't keep track of how much BOCES aid we're getting, how much textbook aid we're getting, how much, special ed aid we're getting. And it's, we try this, and I hate to say it, but the smoke and mirrors all the time with the state aid. And I'll talk about it. And, it's not sustainable, and it's enough with the games. Put the dollars on the table. Let us see what we have and let us plan. And I know this is COVID, and I know that the economy's hit very hard, but we all know how our programs have been hit very hard, and we know what our kids are going to need going into next year. One of the other very disconcerting things that was in the governor's budget run, 2 things actually. One is this star line, and there's a document in your packet that shows you the comparison of state aid. It's not in the PowerPoint. It's called the 21-22 Executive Budget Proposal, and I've asked Vince to reflect this into the state aid sheet or slide that we have so you could see it. But basically what the governor's done in this year's output report, just projected, he's added in the star payment. So here's how star works. Everybody who owns a home gets some type of deduction if they're qualified off their school tax bill called a star reduction. And some of the rules have changed over the years. Some of it has pretty much stayed the same. Some people, when you sell your house, you have to reapply for it. There's been more and more restrictions to it. But what happens is the taxpayers get the money deducted off of their bill, and the school district deducts it off of the levy. It comes out of the levy. And then what happens is that the school district gets reimbursed for that money. So when we see a STAR adjustment or a STAR payment on our state aid, STAR is not state aid. STAR was a program that Governor Pataki put in place to really help taxpayers with minimizing school taxes. So it's very disconcerting to see all of a sudden a line which looks like it's supplanting aid from the STAR line. And then for next year, what we see is we see it in and we see it out. So for all of us, when we're looking at it, it really does look like smoke and mirrors, and there's not a big explanation for what that is. The second part of the governor's proposal that's concerning is that there's a line that says federal stimulus or COVID stimulus. And for us, there's a $2 million amount there that's added into this budget. Although there are no explanations about what that is. And we've been told, and I know NYSET's been told, there's no detail to what that $2 million is. We don't know if it's for 2 years, 3 years. We don't know if it's just a loan. We don't know how we can use it. It's just a number that's been put into our run, and we've been told to set it aside initially until, correct me if I'm wrong, Vince, set it aside, watch it, and let's see what the rules are around it. Don't plan on it, because if you plan on it and plan on it the wrong way, you can find yourself in with a lot of concerns and a lot of issues. So hopefully within the next month, as we get closer to a state budget being put in place, and Vince will point that out to you on what we're dealing with there when he goes over the state aid numbers. On the other side of the budget is the expenditure side, the expenses. We have unfunded mandates. We talk about that a lot. We've had the pandemic costs that have really had us come out of pocket and out of reserve and out of fund balance. We've had the delay of smart bond money, so we've had to upfront the purchase of our Chromebooks and smart boards, which we did because we needed to. And hopefully we're going to get that payment back, but we're always worried when we're waiting for the state to give us money back. Sometimes they delay it, but we could not wait. Those are things that had to happen. Special ed costs. Dr. Fogarty and Vince and I are working really hard with the principals to see how we can minimize special ed costs and minimize transportation, salary, pension, health insurance, typical areas in the budget that drive increasing expenditures, and I talked about the pandemic. Two other points I just want to bring out here while we're talking about this is I want to talk about our declining enrollment. I've talked to you a little bit about that. We'll have a slide that goes up in the next meeting or two about how our enrollment has declined over the last 10 years. Right now, our enrollment's about 1,565 in our buildings. Years ago, we used to be about 2,100, 2,100. So we're steadily declining, and our enrollment projections, which have been right on, have us probably decreasing over the next 5 years, anywhere from 100 to 300. Well, no, 100 to 200 more. I think the projection is about 1,350. But we'll have to see, if it does come to fruition. Okay, on the next slide, just a few other points. Our ability to fund educational programs is severely limited, as I said earlier, by the tax levy limit. Foundation aid continues to lag along. We just talked about that. Tax levy limit, along with increasing costs, presents the district with limited options. That's why we've been using our fund balance. The governor adjusting state aid in the amount of federal stimulus. And again, you're going to hear us talk a lot about supplement versus supplant. Really important. One of the things that we're looking at moving forward is where we were for the 2021 school year, why we had to make the cuts that we did, and then looking forward this year because the 20-year reduction did not happen as the governor threatened it would, although they would have withheld some monies that are left over from the 1920 school year for about $250,000. They did not dip into our aid like they said they would. So contractually, we were faced with various options last year on what to do. And we knew that if the governor did make cuts, we had some constraints that we had to follow along with the contracts that we have. And we did a reduction in the amount of $1,656,155. So that was the bad news. The good news is that it didn't decrease. And the good news is that we will be able to reallocate and restore positions. Now, they're not all going to be the same positions that were reduced. We know that we have a lot of various needs with regard to mental health, with regard to other programming issues. One of the things we're going to be talking about next week is reconfiguration, our PTech grant, and how we can build leverage in our budgets by reconfiguring the grades, saving some money on special ed costs, saving some money on sharing resources along the same bell schedules, and being creative with what types of courses can be offered to our students 7-12 and what kind of additional support can be provided down in the elementary school. So that is the purpose of the grade reconfiguration, and that is the purpose of making some recommendations to you to restore some positions. So some of the items that the administrators that we've been looking at, down in the elementary school last year, we lost a music teacher. We had a retirement that we didn't fill. We are short an art teacher. We think it's really important to plan for extended day opportunities and summer school K-12. If you remember, we've always had 9-12 summer school and a boost academy. Our students are going to need whatever they can to come back. So, some supplemental services over the summer that hopefully we'll be able to provide. I've made it very clear with BOCES because we'll be sharing staff again with other districts that we want it in person here. This remote piece, especially for our little ones, is not working. Part of the school improvement grant, school improvement initiatives, because we're on the list and we've been identified for some subgroups, and our literacy rates are to bring some more content specialists back, adding a behavior specialist and an analyst for grades K through 6, a social worker for grades K through 6, an attendance support person down in the elementary school K through 6, possibly a second social worker, so that they have those qualifications to do a lot of outreach and aligning with resources. A social worker, behavior specialist for grades 7-12, an additional psychologist 7-12, a foreign language teacher. That foreign language teacher will allow us to restore foreign language in 7th grade so that students can have a 2-year opportunity in foreign language, and then when we're back on track with that, be able to possibly offer some additional foreign language at some other grade level, but that's down in the future. A social studies teacher, 7-12, and a physical education teacher. We're not sure if that PE teacher is going to be 0.5 or 1.0 yet. When we cut the expenditures last year, we cut right across all areas. So we're looking to add a cleaner back. When we have all the kids back, that will be very helpful. Our needs in the technology and computer technician technology areas have been great, and we're limping along, but I really give them a lot of credit. Our technology people have been great, but there's more and more need as we use more and more technology. Although we cut an administrative position, we looked at what the needs are, and we think we need administrative support, not necessarily an administrator right now, but someone to really hone in on payroll and human resources to support some of the challenges that we've had with not payroll, but some of the challenges we've had with human resource. And we'll have more information as we roll through here. We cut about $50,000 out of the athletic budget and any related benefits. So you can note on the bottom, this is subject to change as the budget's developed. These are just things we've been talking about that bring us into the area of about $1.6 million, which again, the money is in the budget for next year unless we see some kind of major reduction. We don't anticipate that. We do anticipate that there'll be some additional federal stimulus money. Governor's put $2 million. We have no idea what that means. So we're in a holding pattern right now to see exactly, where we're going to be with that. So I'm going to turn the slides over to Vince. When we get to the state aid number, I'll discuss a little bit more with you, Vince.
Thank you. So the slide that I'm presenting now is the general overview for I'll call them departmental budgets. So those are lines 1 through 19. Then we break down some of the federal fund items down below just to keep those two separate. And what we'll do over the next couple of budget workshops is we will dive into each of these lines in detail. And you can look off to the right, you can see which line items or which department has actually considerably increased or have decreases. And tonight's workshop, we're doing something a little different. And when we get to those 5 departments that we're presenting tonight, I've pulled out those lines that have increased or decreased dramatically. And then I have the department managers, I'm one of them, available to answer any questions regarding the lines that have increased or decreased. So when we get to the second part of tonight, and I'll start up another presentation, you'll actually see those items in detail. I do report on the bottom of this slide, lines 34 and 35, the budget is up right now 1.81%. That's before we add in those positions that the superintendent referenced. So that number will go up. And then also the tax levy, we are at 1.78%. That is the tax levy limit. It used to be called the 2% tax cap, but there's a lot of different variables that go into that. But right now our tax levy is at 1.78%. Earlier, the superintendent referenced our revenues. That's where we get our funding to be able to pay our expenses. The slide that's on the screen now talks about in draft mode where our monies come from, and I break it down in a couple different sections. I'm not going to dive through each of these in detail, but I'll point out some of those higher items. Line 5, we've seen over the last couple of years a BOCES refund, so I've added in $200,000 to reflect the BOCES refund or increase there. The Kohls Pilot is decreasing considerably, and I believe next year is the last year of the Kohls Pilot. That means that we will not get funding from Kohls. They will actually go back onto the tax rolls. Delise, do you remember how long? Was it a 15-year pilot?
I think it was I think initially it was 20 and then it was decreased to 15.
Yeah, I remember.
And maybe even 10
it was
after the last
renegotiated. Thank you.
renegotiation.
Right. Line 16, that's where the superintendent mentioned earlier, there's a big jump budget to budget. That's our operating aid. Last year, we anticipated a 20% reduction. That's why you see a $3.4 million increase, but it's not actually a $3.4 million increase from year to year, but that's budget to budget. And I'll dive into that in a little while. Federal funding has stayed about the same. And then with the increase that we're seeing in state aid and with the budget reductions from last year, I'm anticipating next year to use less in fund balance. The superintendent talked about that a little bit with the $1.6 million that we anticipated being cut for this school year. It wasn't cut, so that allows us to save some of our fund balance for this year and not have to spend as much of it for next year. The slide that's on the screen now is a high-level analysis of our state aid budget to budget from last year to this year. There's another packet that the board has that's not part of the two PowerPoints. So you have two PowerPoints and you have the full budget packet that has all the details of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And on the 9th page of that document, the superintendent referenced as the executive proposal. And what I'll do for the next workshop for next week, I will take this slide and I will work in there the lines that are new. That's the star payment that the governor is showing in our state aid for this year, as well as the star payment for next year. But they're also removing the star payment from the budget. And the superintendent referred to, we're not really sure what the governor is doing, presenting the state aid this way, as well as consolidating all those aids that we've had, the expense-driven aids, into one line item called the services aid. We're hoping that when it gets up to the legislators, that they say no to that proposal the way that he's presenting it now, so that we can actually dive into the details of what these line items look like, and I can present it to you that way. So what's being presented is the high-level overview, but page 9 of the full budget detail actually shows you line by line of what each of these items look like going into this presentation. And on the bottom of the slide, the aids that are rolled up into the services aid are listed in the bottom in the yellow.
So I just want to make a couple of comments on this slide, if I can. So if you look at line number 1 with foundation aid, it's not flat. It decreases 0.02%. So there's no increase in the governor's foundation aid allocation. He's taken the services aid, if you look at that, and he's increased those lines for $231,394, 4.91% increase over the last year, just on that amount. So when we first got the run, I said, what the heck is services aid? Like, what is that? And then we noticed that there was none of the other aids listed. So on the bottom of the sheet that Vince put together, services aid includes BOCES, textbooks, software, library materials, computer hardware and technology, supplemental public excess costs. That's special ed aid, right? So let's combine that in a formula that has nothing to do with special ed aid. I'm being sarcastic here. Transportation aid, including summer transportation, that's always been a separate category that's always driven. Our transportation aid is 70%. You get 70% back on the dollar the following year that you spend. Now it's combined in this services aid. Special services aid, academic enhancement aid, high tax aid. In the past, we've always gotten about $550,000 in high tax aid. And we don't have a charter school, so I don't even know what that charter school transitional aid is. But that's all now lumped together in one line. So it is smoke and mirrors. We want our formulas back. We want to see what we're getting back on the dollars we're spending on transportation, BOCES, special ed, public excess costs. While I was on the phone with the assemblymen and senators, there was a feel that had to be restored, that there's not a huge appetite for consolidating all of these aids. But I have to say, it's disingenuous to have a 0% or a slight minor decrease on foundation aid and have some kind of aid that we can't back into on these services aid. We spend money with BOCES. Historically, we get more money back. Our special ed public excess cost money, we can't drill into that to see what it is. So as I said, it's counterintuitive and it's disingenuous to lump all of those things together. And then if you go to line 6 and line 7, just so you can see, let's take a look at the column that says budget 2021. And on line 7, you see a decrease of $678,311, right? But on the bottom, you see an increase of $678,311. So they gave us stimulus money last year, and then they deducted a pandemic adjustment out of our foundation aid. So we didn't get any additional stimulus money last year. It was an in and it was an out. That's called supplanting. That's not a supplemental payment that came to the district. It was supplanting. Now go over to line 6, where you see the governor's run and you see the COVID-19 supplemental stimulus. Well, it's supplemental, all right, because there's not a deduct on any of the lines, but we don't know what that is. We don't know if it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. We don't know what the rules are with the $2 million. We don't know. So we know we have money because we cut last year based on the projection. And we know we'll be able to restore based on what we had. We don't know if we're getting anything more than that. And based on the patterns that we've seen before, we're putting that in the parking lot for the next month to see what we can do and where we could go with it. So those are some of the challenges we have. And there is an estimated additional pandemic adjustment. You have the $2 million out and then $1.7 million deducted. So we have a lot of fine tuning to do with this. The reason why we know that we have room to add back is from the money that we cut out of last year's budget. So we're just going to have to monitor this as we go along.
Right, and what's actually aggravating to me is that when we get federal funds, typically the 10 years that I've been doing this, when we get federal funds, it always has to be supplemental. One of the rules of title funds and the 611 and 619 is we can't supplant. We can't take the money. So if the feds were going to give us more money, we can't take that money and cover existing costs. They want it to be supplemental to what we're currently spending. But yet in New York State, we get the money, but then the governor takes it away. So that's really supplanting rather than being supplemental. I always like to present the budget at a real high level, just with a different lens. So here I talk about, and I broached the topic before of where our funding comes from. Our total budget for next year is $43.5 million. $1 million is from federal funds. The rest of it, the $52 or $51.5 million comes from general funds, and then reserves just about $600,000.
Vince, could I just ask a question? Are these, do they have any other business tonight? Should we bring them up so that they can get in, get out?
So the department managers are on my next slide or my next presentation, which will go pretty quick. I don't have that many left. I figure we'll get to them in about 10 minutes, okay. But I have them here just in case the board has very specific questions that I'm unable to answer regarding some of the details in their budgets and why they're asking for the increase.
I just didn't want them waiting around if they didn't have to.
Thank you. So again, here's just another lens or another view into the budget. So we talk about last year's budget, the first draft for this year, what the increase is, what the tax levy limit is. CPI is at 1.23%, and that impacts our transportation budget. Our costs go up at CPI. In the past, we've been lucky. It's been at 0%, but it's 1.23% next year. And then here's a quick calendar of what we're looking at. This is the only budget workshop where it's independent. All of our other budget workshops are going to be part of regular school board meetings. And on these dates, the school board meetings, just make a note, please, that they start at 7 o'clock, not at 7:30. So we're moving those board meetings up a half hour just so that we have time to get the budget workshop in, and then we can also take care of any regular school board business that we have to. Quick what's next. We've got the department budget we've talked about, and we've touched on some of these topics already. Tomorrow when I get in the office, these slides as well as the budget packet will be available on the district's website. If you click on district in the business office, you can go to budget, and then you'll see the budget for 21-22. There'll also be a public form that people can fill out and email to me, or they can email me specific questions regarding anything that they saw tonight or anything that has been presented in the past. I usually dive into detail, and I know it's painstakingly boring what the tax cap formula looks like. We've all seen it for the last 10 years. I've put it in the packet. That's something that goes in the budget booklet that goes out in all the post office. It's available for anybody to read, to dive into. It'll be posted up on the website. But I wanted to give everybody a quick analysis for the last 5 years of what our tax cap or what our tax levy looked like. And you can see for just about all those years, they've been well under 2%. And in the years that it's gone over 2%, for example, for this year, 2021, that was driven by some exemptions that we can actually put in the budget. So that would be things like our borrowings for our capital projects. So in years past, if the TRS rate or the ERS rate went over the 2%, we were allowed a certain amount of dollars that would allow us to have an exemption to that 2%. So this is just a quick overview. And like I say, you can definitely dive into the formula if you want. Different business officials present it different ways, but it all works the same way formula-wise. So since I report on the administrative budget, the capital budget, as well as transportation, I put all three of them up here on this slide right now. So administrative is what the costs are for running each department or each office or each building, depending on how you want to look at it. Overall, the administrative budget is up 0.5%, and the one line item that is driving that is really school board association dues have increased over the couple of years. So that's $1,000 increase, which drives that line. And if you look at the administrative budget, it's on line 5. So let me give everybody a quick way to read this. The left column is the department budget that I'm presenting. The line number, the second column, is where you can find it in the packet on the, for example, here for the administrative budget. If you want to see Board of Education, you can jump down to line 5. I give a quick description of what that line is, the dollar difference, as well as the percentage change. So overall, the administrative budget, I'll call it flat, and then there's a 9% change in the school board association dues, which is $1,000. Capital, which is really buildings and grounds, but we cover a lot of different items in there, borrowing, maintenance of our facilities, items of that nature. And so we are seeing a $9,000 increase, which is roughly a 60% change in that budget. But that's because the maintenance agreement that we have on our telephone system, this was the last year of that. So we have to budget for it for next year. There is going to be an increase. We did go out to bid this year through a cooperative bid with Ulster BOCES and all the schools in Ulster County for waste rubbish removal. That has gone up $1,000. That's 4.5%. Overall capital is actually down 0.25%, and I'll show you why in a second. If you have been in our buildings last year, and if you're in the middle school gym, you'll notice that our middle school gym floor is in grave need of a complete sanding and being redone. We redid the high school gym last year, but the middle school gym, I plan on doing it next year. So that's going to cost us about $2,000 more. And the only reason why it's only $2,000 is we're not using the high school gym this year. We're going to be using it very little, so I don't anticipate it getting a lot of wear and tear. If sports start and that gym gets a lot of use, we may have to have it redone, but it's not going to be at the same expense that it has been in the years past. Lines 88 and 89 are our debt service. That's what it cost us to pay back the money that we borrowed to do our last capital project. As time goes on over the 15-year borrowing, your interest payments go down. So we have a $9,000 decrease in our principal and interest payments. That's just under 1%. And a line item that we took out, which was costing us roughly $9,000, were the cost of snacks for our pre-K program, which we don't have anymore. And that was the general fund covering those expenses because they cannot be taken out of the cafeteria fund or the C fund, and that's out of our food service fund. And transportation is up just over 1.5%. That's mostly being driven by CPI at 1.23%. And then there is an increase in our routing software, which is what we use to build our school bus routes, what time Vince at 33 Main Street has got to get on the bus, so our transportation company can figure out how long it's going to take the kids here, let the parents know what time to expect the bus to be at the bus stop, give or take 5 or 10 minutes. So there has been an increase in that software for next year. I'll take a break for a second. I know I've been plowing through this, but does anyone have any questions on any of those lines or any of the details that I've provided in the packet? Okay. So the next slide, Mr. L and Mr. Aponte are here. Tim runs along with Mr. Buckler, our TV and radio station, educational TV, and Mr. Aponte is our director of technology. I have them here just to answer any questions on some of their requested increases. So the AV budget pretty much stays flat. Tim does a really good job replacing and repairing the items that need repair through our audiovisual line. So he's not asking for any more money there. Our computer-aided instruction, which is Mr. Aponte, overall that's up 52%, which is $129,000. All of that, with the exception of some software, so I'd say $150,000, $130,000, is due to the purchase of more Chromebooks to have a 2-to-1 initiative. In the past, we've talked about a 1-to-1 initiative, one Chromebook for one student, but with what's going on in the past year, students need a Chromebook at home and they need one in schools. To have the Chromebook travel back and forth, we didn't think that was going to be such a good idea. Now, we have some Chromebooks here in school for students if they forget it, but our goal is to have a 2-to-1 initiative so they can have one at home and they can have one here. And that's why you're seeing a substantial increase in computer-aided instruction. Have I missed anything, Mr. Aponte? Any questions about computer-aided instruction or CAI as we talk about? Mr. Burns?
Vince, what's the lifespan of these Chromebooks we're buying? I know every district's buying them, and in another district I saw like 300 broken ones in the corner of the library. How are ours holding up?
So I will pass the microphone over to Mr. Aponte, but I will tell you also in your packet, not presented here, is a schedule. We try to do a 6-year schedule for the replacement of our technology equipment. We've had Chromebooks get damaged. Moses's crew, the tech department that the superintendent referenced before, they do a really good job repairing the ones that they can. Sometimes they're beyond repair, and then they use them for parts. Mr. Aponte, how long should a Chromebook last, do you think? So 5 years, which would fit right into about our 6-year schedule. If we find out that they're lasting less time, then Mr. Aponte will change the 6-year schedule to maybe advance it a little bit. Luckily, Chromebooks are $345, or are they a little bit less than that? $280 right now. We're pretty lucky. I can remember when I was buying computers here, when I had Moses's job, I was spending $1,000 for a computer, so it was really expensive. Now with the Chromebooks and using G Suite, we can actually get by not spending as much money, and they're very mobile devices, and the batteries on these things last almost a full day. Mr. Burns, did that answer your question?
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then in educational TV and radio, that's Mr. L. He's looking for some pieces of equipment. I don't remember what they are. They are in the package, so if you give me a second to pull it out. So his increase is $12,813, which is an 88% increase, but it's not a lot of money. He's looking for some items for the studio, a MacBook, some recorders. Did I miss anything, Mr. L? And a new PC to run the radio station. Thank you. That's it for CAI or computer-aided instruction. Oh, he's got a PTZ camera in there, too, for the kids to That's that one right there? Great. Any questions for Moses or for Tim? Remember, so that's it for tonight's workshop.
And I think some of the board members may have some questions, Vince, in reference to some staffing issues.
Okay, fine, no problem. But my part's done. If we have any questions, we can certainly address them. I'm going to let Mr. L and Mr. Aponte head on out of here if we don't have any more questions for them. Thanks, guys.
Just one question, Mr. Ponte, is there a lot of issues going on with the feeds down in the elementary school for the?
You want to stand over there? Or I don't stand over.
There were a few issues that we were having throughout the district. They had stemmed from one issue that we were having with Google, with G Suite itself. We had one minor issue with the ISP, but the most recent issue that we have just finalized was we had about a 10-year-old piece of hardware in district, which was our firewall, which had an inability to be able to keep up with the new increased speeds. We've since then replaced that firewall and have had very limited issues being reported throughout the district. There was one in your wife's class that we have to further investigate.
Do you have enough money to, or do you have enough bandwidth? Do you need anything more for the school? Because I constantly hear about not being fast enough.
What currently the district subscribes to 600 megabytes. That's on our upload and our download. Since we've replaced that piece of hardware, which was at the beginning of last week, we were able to hit those speeds. And when on our busiest time during the day, we may be pushing about 380 to 420 to the internet. So we have plenty of overhead.
All right. So because I heard that when the high school's in and the elementary's in, there's issues.
That was addressed after that. So every session of a Google Meet requires at least 1 megabyte of upload speed. We were only at the time able to push about 75. Now we could push over in excess of 500 to the internet.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Any board members want to bring up anything about the budget? Wayne?
I have a request for next budget meeting or Board of Ed meeting, whatever it is. I'd like to see a spreadsheet of all of our special ed class sizes, and with enrollment going down, our special ed budget every year is going up double digits. I would like to see how many students we're projecting to be in every classroom next year and how many aides are in those classrooms, please.
Special ed.
Yes.
Dr. Fogarty coming to the next meeting?
We can have them come.
That would be good.
Last year we didn't cut across the board. Special ed really didn't get touched. And not that I'm looking for anyone to lose their job or be furloughed, but I think that we have to make sure that everyone's in the right places.
I know he is looking at bringing some students back from out of district placements and creating a class to save us some money. So he's supposed to give us a class profile on that and show us what the savings are. So I know he's working on that, but we'll have him put this together. So you're asking for every class size for special ed, number of aides, and budget to budget.
Yes.
Yes. That's what
Thank you.
Requested.
I'm assuming that a lot of our special ed costs are set by state mandates too.
IEP.
Right.
Driven by IEP.
And then kids in different classifications, different sizes,
Yes.
with teachers and aides.
Yes. Not untypical in school districts in this environment to have, increasing special ed costs, but the frustration is there because we've talked about this at the expense of other areas in the budget. We've had this, but it's always good to take a deeper dive and look into it. We'll make sure we have all that for you.
Thank you. Julius?
We talk about supplanting. I think this is a situation that as far as I can remember, ever since the lotto, we've been dealing with the same situation because they give us money, supposedly they give us lotto money on one end, and then when you look, they've taken it out someplace else out of the general fund. How much complaining, how much pressure have we put on anybody to really work at that? It seems to be, and with every time you get somebody that gives us money or gives the schools money, education money, they figure out a way to remove it for someplace else while still acting like, well, we've given you this, that, and the other, and causing us more of a pain than they did a help. Some kind of way there needs to be an organized push or something that makes it so obvious or so recognizable that at least they back up a bit, because it happens every time.
Yeah.
You know, the government gives you money to try to supplement education, and then your state budget takes it away and acts like you've received a great windfall, while their mandates eat up whatever it was, and you still lost what you should have gotten and spend more.
So your point's well taken. In the last few years, we have been working with the Alliance for Quality Education. Last year, NICET sponsored some activities with them, and they came down. We did some roundtable talks. At the time, Senator Metzger came, and she listened to the plight that we had. You know, one of the unfortunate things with education aid is that, you know, it's a big part of the state budget. There's no question, but constitutionally, that's required, that school districts are funded through the state. And over the years, what I have witnessed is deductions, then they added back and they say, oh, there was this great increase in windfall, and there hasn't been. It's just a restoration.
Yeah.
So, you know, the foundation aid formula, you know, now the claim could be made with our district, well, you're decreasing. You should have less state aid. It doesn't take away from where we should have been. And it doesn't take away from the kids in our communities, in our cities and in small rural communities that just need more. There's more poverty in the state, and I'm not blaming poverty. Our kids need more. They need more opportunity. And it's easy to say that, oh, we spend the most money on education. Very well may be, but that's the way it's laid out in the state constitution about what it is. People are working hard in schools. Can we get better at what we're doing? Absolutely. But we're going to continue to work with the Alliance for Quality Education to continue to advocate and, you know, ask for, you know, our funding restored.
I believe that we're really perpetrating a fraud. They keep telling us that education is one of the most important things going on in the country. It's the most needed thing. Our kids need to know. But in the process of doing it the way they're doing it, they're destroying that effort, because even though we're declining, the cost of doing what we do is not going with it. The monies that are there. You know, when you look at a lottery system that can give away $400 and $617 or $18 million at a shot, there's something wrong, because at least that much is out there for contributions, supposedly, if that's what they're supposedly using it for. But the thing that you talk about cost of living, talk about what it takes to have a competent wage that you can live off of, that's not going down. So our ability to do what we need to do is hard enough without being ripped off in an effort where they say, we gave you this, but not making it obvious that when I gave you this, I took away this. Some kind of way that has to become to where something is something where the people and the hierarchy or the bureaucracy that's in the middle, that's obvious to. And I just think we've been subject to that for long enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Reverend Collins. As our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Haverly stated, our next budget workshop will be at our board meeting February 23rd. It will start at 7 o'clock. and want the board to know that Dr. Devin Kraft reached out to me today. I have invited him to our next meeting to talk about the impact of COVID on sports so that everybody has the same information. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned.